now, continuously again until the 35th anniversary. And by the 35th anniversary, I hope we know a whole lot more about the truth of this situation than we know tonight. So let's work hard. But I want to welcome you on behalf of the symposium planners, Mary Farrell and myself, and say that we're committed to continue this quest for truth. If you've not read the letter or the quote at the top of it, I want to read it to you. And for those of you who can't read, well, you'll know what it says. This is a time for courage and a time for challenge. Neither conformity nor complacency will do. Neither the fanatics nor the faint-hearted are needed. So let us not be petty when our cause is so great. Let us not quarrel amongst ourselves when our nation's future is at stake. Let us stand together with renewed confidence in our cause. That's a quotation from a speech of John Kennedy's that, of course, was never delivered in Austin, Texas, prepared for November 22nd, 1963. So when I saw that, I thought, hey, this applies to us. And I hope that we'll heed that advice and that we will come together and work together very, very hard as the new files release is in process. And we'll see things, folks, that have been hidden for 30 years. And there's been a lot of light going to be shown on this particular subject, and I'm glad for it. Well, it's my honor and privilege. I'm not going to talk to you much. We got a guy here who knows how to talk. And so I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. I'm tickled to death that he's the one that's been selected to do this. Walt Brown, Ph.D., has been studying the Kennedy assassination virtually since it happened. He has written The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, which was published in 1992. If you've not read that book, do it. It's a splendid book based on fact. It's a novel, but the novel connotation ought to be put on another book that was handed to the American people in 1964. And so you can enjoy this one. He's also written Blue Death, Red Patsy, White Lies, which is due out this next year. He has written The War on Omission, which will hopefully be out in late 1995, so you can see this man has been busy. As well as he's also written a JFK monograph, which is due right now. It's not currently out, but will be in a few days from Prevailing Winds Research. He is also the author of John Adams and the American Press, to be published in early 1995. He is, of course, a regular contributor to articles and book reviews of the various major JFK newsletters and journals, and also serves on the advisory boards of the JFK Resource Center here in Dallas, as well as the Coalition on Political Assassinations you'll be hearing from tomorrow, based in Washington, D.C. He also enjoys writing suspense fiction and is also working on a book that will take a unique look at Watergate. And I can't wait for that one either. So without spending his time, I want you to give a good welcome to Dr. Walt Brown. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? You took a couple of my gags, Gary. I had asked Gary to mention somewhere in the introduction that so that I don't have to do this one by one with everybody. People come up to me afterwards and say, "What, I've read your work, et cetera, what do you do?" And then I have to look at them, kind of lip turned down. I said, "Well, I teach 4th grade." And I was hoping Gary would mention that because you need to know it just in case as I get going tonight I lapse into, so listen, boys and girls. So if I do, please forgive me and understand. And when I get past the part that I've memorized, I'll have to go to the glasses, so then you'll know. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to the members of the research community who began the process of holding this symposium for each of the past few years. And I would also like to thank the full-time organizers who bring their special talents to A.S.K. Without both groups, I would not be here speaking to you this evening. And having said that, I suppose it's only fair to also extend my dubious thanks to the conspirators themselves as well as the members of the Warren Commission, without whom I would not be speaking to you here this evening.
Although you may construe my subsequent remarks to be critical of the Warren Commission, they are not exclusively to be singled out for criticism, as we must remember that they, in fact, received precious little help. They got virtually nothing from the FBI, nothing from the CIA, they got nothing from SMERSH, although they did get a great deal from Spectre. But it is truly an honor to be selected to give this keynote address at this year's conference. And I can go back very easily in my mind to September 15th when I received the invitation at the mail. And I think my first immediate thought was, I can't believe this. Last year they had Norman Mailer, and this year they've got somebody who knows something about the case. Thank you. Shortly thereafter, however, the real enormity of the task in front of me dawned on me, because I realized I'd been given the responsibility to share with you this evening and throughout the conference and on Monday's panel a critique of the Warren Report, which will undoubtedly be considered as the 20th century's most famous and controversial work of fiction. I then thought that perhaps I could do with this keynote address what no previous such address had done, and I decided to make this hour tonight a debate with Gerald Ford, the lone assassin, the lone surviving member of the Warren Commission. As you're no doubt aware, Mr. Ford has not only outlived any of the other commissioners, but he has also long outlived the public's belief in the Warren Report. I immediately made the necessary contacts, only to receive ground rules that Mr. Ford would only agree to a debate if all words that I would use would be 5 letters or less. Initially, it seemed to pose a challenge, although I agreed, inasmuch as it occurred to me at the time that most of my references to the Warren Report are in fact 4-letter words. So there wasn't any problem. As it turned out, however, as it always does seem to happen, Mr. Ford had the last laugh as he informed me that he, too, would be giving a keynote address at a symposium this evening, and that he would be addressing far more people than I would. And I have to tell you, I was amazed because I never realized that there are that many people that believe they have been beamed up into UFOs. However, out of fairness, since I had sent him a great deal of material, I did send him one last thing, and I said, look, if it's something you want me to put into the record, send me something email. Sure enough, email. I suppose by now that you realize that such addresses are supposed to begin on humorous notes, unless of course you remember Norman Mailer's. But I don't want you to think that I shall devote the entire evening, nor point the entire symposium totally in the direction of Warren Commission bashing. As a matter of fact, in my research, I've discovered at least a dozen questions that they asked that had some merit. And the number is subject to debate, but also I want to share with you an experience kind of unique to researchers and friends that have visited me and sat in the study where I've done my work over the last few years. In one corner of the room, and the room is filled with autographed memorabilia, sports, politicians, or movie stars, whatever. But in one corner of the room, there were 3 nicely framed autographed photos kind of by themselves. And knowing me and knowing my work, people that visit me are surprised to see on the wall of all places a signed photograph of former President Ford. Right beneath it is a signed photograph of Senator Arlen Specter. Eventually, however, the visitors that are there are just naturally drawn to the third picture, which is a very beautiful, very bittersweet signed portrait of Emmett Kelly Jr. The photo of the clown that I just mentioned, and maybe I should be more specific here as to which clown, the photo of Emmett Kelly Jr. replaced the photograph of Clint Eastwood that had once hung there. And I took that down after the first time I saw In the Line of Fire. Toward the end of the movie, a pensive Secret Service agent Horrigan says, "You know something? For years I've been listening to all these idiots on bar stools with all their pet theories on Dallas. And the first time I heard that, it really hit home a little bit, even though I neither drink nor do I have any pets in Dallas. Yet having seen the movie several times now, I have to tell you that I would rather be an idiot on a bar stool than an idiot on a running board, following the car where the president is being shot in broad daylight. And if caring about the memory of John Kennedy and caring about the truth of his assassination makes someone a bar stool idiot, then I guess I am proud to be one. And if anybody here feels the same way, I would ask you to stand up for just a minute and be counted for something that matters. Thank you all. I would like to thank you for that, and I'd also like to add that I personally, on any given day, would rather be a barstool idiot than a senator from Pennsylvania who disgraced himself with Gene Hill, who disgraced himself with Anita Hill, and who regularly disgraces himself on Capitol Hill. Although I wrote that prior to this week, and I'm afraid now that I've said it, he's allowed equal time since he's a candidate. But then again, I'm not, so. Changing direction slightly, it can truly be said of the Warren Commission, never did so few people with so little talent spend so little time and produce so little in the way of results. And that, ladies and gentlemen, not boys and girls, friends, fellow barstool conspiracy freaks, will essentially be my text for this evening. Although I must tell you, I struggled a little bit for the right verb to try and indicate what would we be doing here this weekend. We are here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Warren Commission? I don't think so. We are here to commemorate the 30th anniversary? Well, that was a little closer, although it sounds in a sense like the issue of a new postage stamp, which in a sense gives it some relevance because law dictates that you must be dead to appear on a U.S. stamp, and I can think of few things more dead than the Warren Commission findings. Nevertheless, I settled on the verbs reconsider with respect to the Warren Commission and rededicate with respect to what we need to do from here on out. The reconsideration would begin with something I call the Warren Commission and me. I was 16 years old on that gray New Jersey afternoon when John Kennedy was killed. And like so many other Americans, I was numb. President Eisenhower could have easily passed for just about anybody's grandfather, or the original Uncle Sam for that matter. Yet John Kennedy was younger than my father. Kennedy had wit, a quality I obviously admire. He had, as he used to say, great vigor. He lived life fully, as we now know. Yet in all things, as Tommy Lee Jones said in the movie JFK, he was a man of true panache. On the Sunday after John Kennedy was killed, in living black and white, Oswald was killed. And as many of you may realize, or some may not, it was Jack Ruby's bullet that created the Warren Commission. Had Oswald not been publicly executed, there would not have been a Warren Commission. But more to the point, it was not the death of Kennedy, which just left us numb and praying that someday the sun would in fact shine again, but rather the death of Oswald, the killing of one lone nut by another lone nut that got Americans angry. Americans demanded the truth. What they got was the Warren Commission. Or as I suggest in a book that Gary referenced, the Warren Omission. I will touch on this topic in much greater depth on Monday morning on the Warren Omission panel. In the meantime, I'm certainly thankful to the organizers for naming a panel after an upcoming book. The media, and I'll be addressing this also, now today perceived as an enemy of the JFK research community, openly ridiculed the slipshod procedures that passed for police work in Dallas during that tragic weekend. And by 1963, 1964, people had a pretty good idea of just who and what J. Edgar Hoover was all about. And many people, and many Texans in particular, did not like the FBI climbing all over a case where they had absolutely no business. Yet despite what they would like us to believe was the most exhaustive investigation in history, and maybe it was because I could exhaust myself telling you 10% of the stuff they did wrong. In September 1964, the American public was told by 7 honorable men that the Dallas police were right, and J. Edgar Hoover was right, and that Oswald and Oswald only committed the assassination of the president. Then people read the evidence, studied the testimony, viewed the exhibits, at least to the extent that such material was available, and wondered very vocally why, if a lone nut killed the president, materials were tucked away until the year 2039, 75 years after the report was delivered to Lyndon Johnson. In the doubts created by that early and often difficult research, many unanswered questions were raised. But one thing was for certain: we had been denied a very fundamental truth. As time passed, we came to realize it. We came to realize that we could be told anything by our government, and as its little children, we would believe what we were told. We were told to believe Vietnam. We were told of the lone assassin who killed Martin Luther King, and of yet another lone assassin who stood 4 feet in front of Robert Kennedy and killed him with a bullet that struck in the back of his head from a distance of less than 2 inches. We were told to accept Watergate as a third-rate burglary, which it would have remained had not 2 reporters doggedly believed otherwise. We were told to accept Iran-Contra Gate and Darrell Gates. Somewhere amidst that wreckage of crapola, we lost the truth and we lost our country. We lost the country to interests so immense that they could care less about all of us. And whatever they want from us, as long as it had the old stamp of approval, that was the truth no matter what we thought. Today, sadly, they own us. And the reason I've spent as much time as I have trying to come to grips with the Warren Commission is because the death of John Kennedy and the subsequent publication of the official hoax called the Warren Report were the first 2 down payments made by the power brokers to own us and to own our country. A great deal of outstanding John F. Kennedy-related research is happening as we gather tonight. Amazingly, there were a few tantalizing morsels in the recent document regurgitation, and you will be reading some new and some interesting revelations in the weeks and months to come. And you will learn much from these new works. Yet what will change? In late 1991 and early 92, thanks to a cinematic presentation called JFK, a whole new generation of Americans learned that something a great deal more sinister than a misfit punk with a cheap rifle had changed the American landscape. Stone's movie did not give us all the answers, but it certainly gave us some very valid questions. Ultimately, however, the outcome was predictable. The regular cast of government stooges got key media spots. They pointed to a shiny set of 26 books and then told the world, 99.99% of whom have never read one word of those 26 books, that the Warren Report is holy writ. Well, whatever it is, it at least rhymes with writ. I'd also like to add, after seeing JFK on TV this week, that there was probably a great deal of truth in the statement that was made by Kevin Costner when he wondered aloud if Earl Warren read what was in those 26 volumes. On a personal level, I'm curious about how much any of them read, and I doubt we'll ever learn the answer to that either. The Warren Commission and the subsequent report, therefore, to me, are the ultimate bumps in the road. No matter what we do as researchers, and no matter what we find out, John Q. Public out there in Peoria says, but the Warren Commission said. So that's why my task has always been, I start there. If we can clear the decks of that, then we can move on. We're here tonight because we don't believe that obvious drivel. Many others still do because we haven't disproved the basic premise, and the basic premise is still the Warren Commission. In my own way, I've tried to disprove the basic premise. In the People versus Lee Harvey Oswald, I demonstrated, at least to my own satisfaction and to the satisfaction of many, many very fine people, some of whom I notice here tonight, who took the time to write to me, that Oswald could never have been convicted had he gone to trial for the murder of John Kennedy. And I've been asked many times, is there any nagging doubt ever that you were wrong and Oswald did it? And the answer is always the same. There's no doubt he was exactly what he said he was, the patsy. In the Kennedy Assassination Quiz Book, which is the monograph that Gary referred to, published imminently, I tried to create a vehicle where facts, not rumors and speculations, could be presented in an entertaining format. The same is true for the audio cassette that I recorded, which is called Sound Bites from the Warren Commission. And if you've heard one of those hard-headed, if you have or know of one of those hard-headed friends that can't be convinced, treat them to some comedy. Let them hear the absolute absurdities of that investigation presented in a different kind of format. And maybe, just maybe, they'll come around a little bit. And remember, we've got that 1964 bump in the road to get over. In Blue Death, Red Patsy, White Lies, I used the Warren Commission's evidence to prove things happened that they didn't want to tell us about. And in the Warren omission, I honestly believe that I dismantled the Warren Commission. As many of you know, I counted every question they asked. And I categorized the questions into one of 8 levels of relevance, and then pointed out that of the 488 witnesses called, only 177 of those witnesses, 36.27% of the total witnesses, were called to testify about the death of John Kennedy. They were asked a total of 30,530 questions, or 27.77% of the Warren Commission's total, but only 2,065 of those questions, or 1.8% of the Warren Commission's total, were valid questions about the death of John F. Kennedy. In the same study, I noted that of the 3,912 published exhibits, only 79 of them, or roughly 90 pages out of 9,831 pages, were of any real evidentiary value. And you know pretty much what the rest of that junk was. And during the month of September, I completed a Warren Commission time management study which totally destroys every premise heretofore considered regarding the Commission, and I will be sharing those findings with you on Monday morning. The Warren Commission and the Warren Report, the onset of the loss of American innocence. And until we repair that specific damage, it will not be our country, and we will not be allowed to know what the truth is. It is fair at this point to let Clint Eastwood, the Secret Service agent in The Line of Fire, speak again. When he was reminded in the movie that he was penalized a month's salary for some of John Kennedy's indiscretions, he told us that was different. He was different. The whole damn country was different. Yes, Agent Horrigan, things were different then. A great deal of it had to do with that vibrant young man who got into a limousine at Love Field and was carried out of it at Parkland Hospital. Those truths we know. So what truths did the Warren Report tell us? Let me read you some of the things they said, and I'll comment on them as we go along. Quote, President Lyndon B. Johnson, by Executive Order number 11130, dated November 29, 1963, created this commission to investigate the assassination on November 22nd of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States. The President directed the commission to evaluate all the facts and circumstances surrounding the assassination and the subsequent killing of the alleged assassin, and to report its findings and conclusions to him. To him indeed. The very wording of their mandate tells us they already knew who did it, since they were going to investigate, number one, who did it and why Lee Oswald was killed. In a sense, you could say, case closed. If you have any further doubts or suspicions that the investigation did not have a preconceived conclusion, look at the names of the first 3 witnesses they called. Marina Oswald, Marguerite Oswald, Robert Oswald. And it was no accident. And it seems damn strange that they're trying to find out who killed the president, and the first 3 presidents are all related to a stock boy who worked in a warehouse overlooking the motorcade route. It is also very convenient that these people were called before anyone else was called, because as material leaked out, they could have countered the damage. Instead, they were called first. Quote, the U.S. Secret Service, which is responsible for the protection of the President, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation began an investigation at the direction of President Johnson. The Secret Service has no jurisdiction whatsoever in an investigative capacity. They never have. There was an article in the newspaper in northern New Jersey, and I don't know how much it was picked up on the wires, but because of that incident 2 weeks ago, with the guy taking target practice in front of the White House, Robert Carswell, quote, 1964 Kennedy source on the Secret Service, has been called in to give us an update on Secret Service efficiency. The bottom line is, when Robert Carswell was called to discuss the 1964 events, he was asked 5 questions by the Warren Commission, and they're basically state your name, state your occupation, Where do you live? How you doing? And is Speaker of the House McCormick under protection right now? Yes. Thank you. Goodbye. That was it. But the papers, our friends, the newspapers, immediately pick up and say, oh yeah, the man that in 1964 helped rebuild the Secret Service from the ground up with 5 questions. And that, by the way, that's the distinction. He was asked the least number of questions. Is now dusted off again, just as somehow the same faces keep appearing in officialdom. Getting back to the report. Quote, throughout the world, reports on these events were disseminated in massive detail. Yes, but unfortunately they weren't disseminated in massive detail in the United States. We had to rely on what we were told by Mr. Hoover and later by the Warren Commission. Quote, the Commission is committing all of its reports and working papers to the National Archives where they can be permanently preserved, boy, and they're doing that, under the rules and regulations of the National Archives and applicable federal law. Marginal note, the papers are protected under federal law, although John Kennedy was not. Of note, since the assassination, it has become a federal crime to assassinate the president, so there will never again be the problem of local folks investigating a case where they might just get to the truth. Quote, after considering the facilities and security problems of several buildings, the trademark was chosen as the luncheon site. Given this selection, and in accordance with the customary practice of affording the greatest number of people an opportunity to see the president, the motorcade route selected was a natural one. Marginal comment, although it violated every imaginable Secret Service rule. And you could read that paragraph again, just changing one word. The trademark was chosen as the luncheon site. Given this selection, and in accordance with the customary practice of affording the greatest number of people an opportunity to shoot the president, the route selected was a natural one. Somehow this isn't as good without the olive. Seconds later, shots resounded in rapid succession, and they never actually tell you how many or how fast. It's just seconds later, shots. You know, you're supposed to know, and the president's hand moved to his neck. A bullet had entered the base of the back of his neck, slightly to the right of the spine. If it didn't, we got the wrong guy. And did you ever have one of those cramps where you just have to go back there and have somebody help you scratch the base of the back of your neck? Hey, you scratch the base of the back of your neck, and I'll, you know. More unambiguous wording is hard to imagine. Before the shooting started, Governor Connolly had been facing toward the crowd on the right. He started to turn toward the left, politically incorrect in Texas, and suddenly felt a blow on his back. The governor had been hit by a bullet which entered at the extreme right of his back and at a point below his right armpit. Passed through his right wrist, which had been in his lap. I mean, that takes the magic bullet to a degree beyond what we've ever considered weird. I'm telling you, his hand was in his lap, and you got to remember, the bullet entered the top of the wrist. Try sitting sometime with your hand in your lap, but people are going to start wondering about you. And then caused a wound to his left thigh. That must have been a heck of an angle. And number two, it overlooks a key bit of John Connolly testimony that we, for the most part, overlook. Most of us sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, you got to remember, John Connolly came forward and said, but I know I was hit by another bullet. Well, the Warren Commission said he was wrong. But the more important thing that he said was, he said, I heard what I immediately took to be a gunshot. I knew this was an assassination attempt. I have to be visual for this. I immediately turned to my right to see the president, but in turning to my right, I could not see him, so as I was turning back left to see him, I felt the shot. Now, what does that tell us? If you look at failure analysis, failure is a word I love to use in respect to Posner, but if you look at failure analysis thing, they've got John Connolly literally sitting on Nellie's lap, so that a bullet can enter Kennedy, 12-degree angle, right to left, enter at the base of the back of his neck, exit here, again going right to left, and then enter Connolly over here. Now if Connolly has the ability or the difficulty in sitting there, turning to his right, and if he can't turn to his right and see the president, and has to turn to his left to see him, then he's right in front of him. How does that bullet go right to left and hit Connolly over here? And to me, that's my problem with the magic bullet. Not so much timing or anything else, but they were lined up. And that big, beautiful color picture that I saw today in the up in the sixth floor window, the Davis photo, those guys are right in line. And if you think about it, Connolly is sitting on that a very uncomfortable jump seat. The only support he's got is the door. Kennedy's sitting in the back seat as comfortable as you could be, at least till Elm Street. And Connolly is so far away that there's no way he could have ever been hit by a bullet that went, even if it had gone straight through John Kennedy, it would have hit Connolly straight in the back. But to hit him over here, going this way, can't be done. Quote, seeing that the president was struck, Kellerman instructed the driver, let's get out of here. I don't know what else he would have said. We are hit. And it's interesting that they quoted Roy Kellerman on that, because there's a lot of other things that Roy Kellerman did say on the record that they chose not to quote. He radioed ahead to the lead car, get us to the hospital immediately. Agent Greer immediately accelerated the presidential car. As it gained speed, Agent Hill managed to pull himself onto the back of the car where Mrs. Kennedy had climbed. Hill pushed her back into the rear seat, showing they didn't look at the Z film too closely, and shielded the stricken president. It makes it sound like, in that account, that the car sped up when it should have, and it's also odd that Hill is given as much credit, and believe me, I respect Clint Hill. But when he testified that the back of the president's head was removed but was visible on the back seat of the limo, he was ignored. And who saw better? With respect to the Parkland doctors, they observed the extensive wound in the president's head. Quote, and the Warren Commission didn't believe a friggin' word they said about it. The narrative then tells of the trip to Love Field, etc., without any mention whatsoever that a local autopsy had been avoided. And we pick it up at Bethesda, Maryland, where it was given a complete pathological examination. I'm glad they used the word pathological in there. Because I'm highly convinced that somehow pathological and pathetic have the same Latin derivative somewhere back in Middle English or something. And one thing that's always troubled me, when you watch, whether it's Murder, She Wrote or Matlock or reruns of Quincy, I don't think I've ever seen a televised post-mortem where there isn't a microphone hanging down and the doctor speaks into it and says everything. Amazingly, of course, there was not one of those in Bethesda, Maryland. And it's just incredibly troubling that they couldn't afford a microphone and a tape recorder down the block here for Oswald's, when they debriefed him or whatever they did, and they couldn't afford a microphone in Bethesda. The great American microphone shortage. And I'm also convinced that if they had had a microphone, the most interesting thing that we would have heard on those tapes from the three fellows that did the autopsy would have been, yeah, that's a dead body, all right. Complete pathological examination. Stick your finger in there and see where it goes. The autopsy disclosed a large head wound. Well, if they'd have missed it, the autopsy disclosed a large head wound observed at Parkland and the wound in the front of the neck, which had been enlarged by the Parkland doctors when they performed the tracheotomy. And folks, we know the examination did not disclose the front of the neck wound. They found out about that by telephone the following day. But there it is. That's the Warren report. You got to believe it. Your government printed it. In addition, the autopsy revealed a small wound of entry in the rear of the president's skull and another wound of entry near the base of the back of the neck. If we tell you enough times, maybe you'll believe it. Quote, at the scene of the shooting, and I'm so glad that Beverly is here for me to read this. This makes it even better. Quote, at the scene of the shooting, there was evident confusion at the outset concerning the point of origin of the shots. The only confusion as to the origin of the shots is in the Warren report. You can see the pictures, you can see the films, everybody runs to the knoll. One officer, one policeman went to the book depository, and we'll get to him in a minute. Within a few minutes, however, attention centered on the Texas School Book Depository building as the source of the shots. Yeah, with all those fellows running around with the fake credentials saying, the building, of course attention centered on it. One eyewitness, Howard L. Brennan, had been watching the parade from a point on Elm Street directly opposite and facing the building. And this is an absolute fabrication, and they knew it. David Bellin even said to him, "We can't see your legs hanging over here on this frame in the Zapruder film," because Brennan is looking back over his shoulder to see the car. Brennan was looking straight ahead at Houston Street. If you get to Dealey Plaza at any time this week, take somebody with you, stand where Zapruder stood, have your friends sit where Howard Brennan claimed to be, and you'll see the difference immediately. If you've never read his book, Eyewitness to History, that's good fiction too, believe me. When I refer to it, I change the title slightly. I call it Eyewitness to History. The best story in there, he got FBI protection. God knows why. He didn't have anything to say. But one of the FBI agents was an exact double for John Kennedy, and the agent admitted that, on frequent occasions I used to double for Kennedy. I wonder what the occasions were. Brennan thought, now this, tongue-in-cheek, but this is serious. You got to listen to the wording of this, because this is the garbage they sold to the American public. Brennan thought he might be able to identify the man since he had noticed him in the window a few minutes before the motorcade made the turn onto Elm Street. In fact, he could not identify him. The implication is suggested, and it is never anywhere denied. There it is. You fill in. You complete the closure there. Oh, he thought he could. But he couldn't and didn't. Now this gets to Marion Baker, who did his job. Baker, having recently returned from a week of deer hunting, was certain the shot came from a high-powered rifle. He looked up and saw pigeons scattering in the air from their perches on the Texas School Book Depository. Now here I have two serious concerns. One was Officer Baker deer hunting amid tall buildings. And number two, were those pigeons on the depository trained only to scatter when the bullet was fired from the building they were perched on? Hey, was that this building or was it from the knoll? Because if it's this building, we got to scatter. If it's the knoll, we can sit here. Of course they're going to scatter. As he reached the front wheel on the driver's side, the man on the sidewalk, it was Tippett reaching the driver's side, the man on the sidewalk drew a revolver and fired several, there again that's that ambiguity, several shots in rapid succession, hitting 4 times and killing him instantly. Now the several shots phrase allows for them to immediately clear up the confusion of that nonsense with this kind of bullet and this kind of cartridge. And it also, in as much as the Warren Commission would later rely on Helen Markham, who admitted to having a conversation with Tippett after he was killed instantly, since the witness can't be wrong, history is rewritten. I love this one. Shortly after 1 p.m., Captain J. Will Fritz, chief of the Homicide and Robbery Bureau of the Dallas Police Department, arrived to take charge of the investigation. Take charge should be used cautiously, as in, after he realized his ship had hit an iceberg, the captain of the Titanic took charge. Lieutenant Day promptly noted that stamped on the rifle itself was the serial number C2766, as well as the markings 1940, Made Italy, and Cal period 6.5. Everybody else in that room, in that 6th floor, must have been stone deaf, as we know that others wrote reports about the gun being a Mauser. And on that point, why, to make our job and our understanding of this a whole lot easier, why didn't the Warren Commission simply get a Mauser, take a picture of it, and publish it, and say, now, you judge, did they make an honest mistake, or is there more to this? And since they didn't, we can only put a sinister interpretation on it. And I want to share something with you from a newspaper, and this is in newspaper print. The New York Journal American, now defunct, Saturday, November 23rd, assassin named. Marksman, Castro Red, like there are a lot of different kinds of red. What was he going to be, a Castro Claret? It was written by Bob Considine, a noted journalist at the time. And what I want to share with you here is the precision with which this article is written. The 24-year-old ex-Marine marksman who attempted to defect to the Soviet Union in 1959 and was returned to this country with a $435.71 U.S. grant. That's not the president. They knew to the penny how much money he got to come back here. That's precision. Justice of the Peace David Johnston handled the arraignment. Most people, just from habit, say David Johnson. He got it right. I'll find it. I didn't want to mark this up. While no positive fingerprints were found on the abandoned Mauser, a paraffin test was made on his right cheek and produced evidence from the pores that they had been recently bombarded with recoil smoke. The assassination seemed carefully planned. Mauser rifle with a telescopic sight found in the building's 5th floor stairwell was clean of fingerprints, police said. There's several other references to a Mauser rifle in here. Again, after about 5 hours of questioning, Oswald acknowledged, and this is a burst of revelation, Oswald acknowledged that he was in the school book warehouse at the time a bullet fired from a Mauser rifle equipped with a sharpshooter's telescopic sight plunged through the head of the president as the chief executive and his party moved by at 15 miles per hour. Mauser. Having said those things, I would like to do 3 things to conclude this evening. The first is a plea, and this is an urgent plea and it's serious, for unity among all of us here that still care enough about these events to find our way here, to pay expenses, and to listen to hours of people talking to us. In the last couple of years, some very unpleasant things have been said in a severely critical way about members of the research community, by members of the research community. I have read that researchers who have begun this conference and people who have opened their hearts, their homes, and their files to me personally are literally co-conspirators in the crime we're trying to solve. There's no law that you have to believe a postulate or a given writer or speaker. If you disagree, as I do with some researchers, please agree to disagree with a commonality of purpose that does not prove divisive to the research community. In some cases, we have become our own worst enemies, and that should not be. Thank you. The second request is, in a sense, a corollary of the first. Many of you have read much of what has been printed. Some have read only some. Regardless, you will be seeing much that is new in the future, either in the form of new publications or old ones that you are unaware of. Please read carefully and critically. Just because you go out and buy something and read it doesn't mean that well, that's a poor example. Everything, that one's okay. But that doesn't mean everyone you buy is going to be just chock full of the gospel. And a loose fact at a symposium, in an article, in a book, with no footnote, no help. Oh, geez, did you know Oswald spent 6 months in Canada before he went to Mexico? No, I mean, this is the GATT assassination. Read critically. Be critical. If it's good, buy 100 of them for your friends. Put them on the bestseller list, because that's the way we're going to get back in notice. And if it's not good, let the world know, hey, this one isn't worth your time. Or buy it and learn from its errors. Take what's good out of it and continue to support the research community. Just to read something doesn't make it true. If that were the case, I would stop at this point and hand out a mimeograph sheet that I have home entitled, in a folder entitled Shooters. It contains the name of 34 people, and I'm sure I've missed a couple, that have been seen, published as shooters in this case. The list is so long and obviously inaccurate. Well, it even includes Oswald. Nevertheless, there are 34 names on the list at this point, meaning that in JFK conspiracy books, there are at least 34 people that authors have cited as being, quote, the shooters. It may be true, but if it is, I don't know how anybody survived in Dealey Plaza. So please, be critical. The reason I put together the JFK Assassination quiz book was simply to guarantee that anyone who wants to can begin with a database, with facts, stuff that you can document. There's no speculations in there. From there, build slowly. Nobody in this room is going to solve this case over the weekend, although I suspect there are a couple of folks who are not here tonight that think they've already solved it twice. We're only going to make progress if we work together, if we respect each other's opinions, and if we find areas where we can take a step or two forward gradually. I can't tell you a heck of a lot about what the CIA was up to because I haven't seen the documents that I would certainly like to see. I've chosen to work on that which I have available to me, the Warren Commission's work and documents that I've been able to pry out. And from those limited sources, I've done what I can. I would also make the offer that any editing, manuscript reading, or help that I can provide to any researcher, I freely offer. And anything I have in my files is available for use by any researchers that need it, and it's just that simple. Just be careful when you're going through my files. Lastly, I'm going to read you a letter that I've written to President Clinton. I believe it says, in a kind and gentle way, something, perhaps many things, that we all feel and that we all believe in and we can all subscribe to. I shall only read you the text, although I will tell you now that I will be signing the letter at the bottom simply, Walt Brown, American. I would hope that each of you would be willing to sign the letter also, because I believe it makes a reasonable case in a reasonable way. However, I would ask you to sign it sometime tomorrow, Sunday, Monday, and not tonight, because after I conclude the letter, the time will be given over to a reception for all the authors and researchers that have come here to share their thoughts and their work with you, and that time is time you should spend with them. If you do not feel comfortable signing the letter, I would look forward to speaking with you either way, and certainly as many as possible. As you have patiently listened to my work, I would like to hear what you're doing, and if I can be of any help, we'll get going on something. Again, I hope you find this letter such that you'd be willing to put your name on it along with mine. Dear President Clinton, it is just past twilight at the Adolphus Hotel in Midtown Dallas, Texas, on the evening of November 18th, 1994. Gathered here are several hundred people who came to this site this weekend because they saved a couple of vacation days, because they cut a corner or two on the grocery budget, or because they put off the new car for a couple extra months, or because they got the car and drove it here all night to be here for this weekend. For the most part, however, these people are here because they will not allow the memory or the vision of John F. Kennedy to disappear forever from the American landscape or its agenda. As such, they are the last survivors of a race of Americans who once felt so strongly about John Kennedy and his vision for America that they made those same kind of sacrifices to allow Mr. Kennedy to reside for 1,037 days in the home where you now live. I have been honored to give the keynote address this evening as part of the weekend activities planned by the Assassination Symposium on John F. Kennedy, A.S.K. I know that my words this evening will bring a tear to the eyes of these wonderful people as they see in their minds images of an America that is now on the distant periphery of our horizon. A young, boyish president laughing while a pony nuzzles him. Preschool children playing hide and seek in the Oval Office. A father and his young son sitting in a beached rowboat. That same young boy's bittersweet farewell salute to his fallen father. Those images and more will be recalled this weekend. Also recalled will be John Kennedy's stirring inaugural rhetoric, which awoke America from years of post-war doldrums, as well as the less idealistic yet highly practical rhetoric employed by the president when he showed his and America's toughness in the face of foreign missiles, arguably the first step in the long process which eventually led to the demise of the evil empire which had targeted those deadly denizens literally in America's backyard. Ultimately, of course, they will focus on the two images frozen forever and in time by the events in Dealey Plaza. The first was the unfinished promise of a new direction for America, a direction that promised a generation of peace, equal civil rights for all, and a decent standard of living for all Americans, which would, by its example, guarantee that American ideals and the American dream would be sought by the world, thereby lessening the need to counter, by force of arms, other ideologies which would pale by comparison. John F. Kennedy's vision for the world was no more and no less than America's promise since its inception. Only John Kennedy intended for the promise to finally become reality. That promise, like its author, died in Dealey Plaza, and that is the final image frozen forever in time and memorialized at symposia such as this gathering at the site of the tragedy. We are reminded of the overflow crowds from Love Field through miles of a motorcade when a violent act robbed America of its best and brightest on an otherwise peaceful, sunny autumn afternoon amidst tens of thousands of well-wishers in a political district that John Kennedy had not won in 1960. The dreamer is gone, but the dream lives on among these people in Dallas this evening, as well as among millions of other Americans throughout our land. But while we cannot restore the dreamer, we dream of the day when we can do that which John Kennedy would have most sought, to find the simple truth. It has been 31 years since John Kennedy's vision for America ended violently in the middle of Elm Street, shortly before a planned luncheon address aimed, among other purposes, at getting out the vote for the following year. Since that agonizing weekend in 1963, many Americans have devoted time, energy, and resources in an attempt to come to grips with the reality of November 22nd, 1963. Although there exists a clear consensus on where and when the event occurred, there is in our land a terrible divisiveness about the who and the why, and to a lesser extent, the how. Sadly, some of this divisiveness is born of infrequent attempts at cheap sensationalism, and America is poorer for such efforts. But for the most part, the concern stems from the fact that every time this tragedy is investigated, more materials are locked away. This is simply not the American way, and it never was. The Warren Commission went out of business 30 years ago, yet they sequestered some files until the year 2039, when you and I, Mr. Clinton, will be in our early 90s. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, which found a conspiracy of sorts, locked up their working papers until 2028, an improvement over 2039, but not much of one. Mr. President, I know that John Kennedy the man and John Kennedy the vision were of utmost significance in your formative years. I also know that you have visited his gravesite, a place where I have gone to reflect on what is and to reflect on what might have been. In my own mind, I suspect you have had somewhat similar thoughts when you were there. Yet President Kennedy's simple plot and eternal flame are but a part of the landscape which contains them. And both the casual tourist who visits Arlington Cemetery and the admirers of John Kennedy must file past thousands of other graves to visit JFK's. Those graves, too, reflect the purpose I have tried to instill in my words to the people at this symposium in Dallas. For the men and the women in those countless plots gave their lives in far-flung corners of this planet, in nations they may have never studied about in school, just because America had a vision of freedom and decency for all people of the world, just as JFK had a vision for all, for the elderly, for those with his vigor, and most of all for the children, who would hopefully reach John Kennedy's age without having to spend extended periods of time in backyard bomb shelters. Those graves are filled with people who died for American principles that are being denied to the memory of John F. Kennedy, the centerpiece of those thousands of graves. Those plots, that vast expanse of Robert E. Lee's former real estate, are filled with Americans, some unknown, who died for the concepts of truth and justice. 31 years after the passing of John Kennedy, those of us here in Dallas join millions elsewhere in seeking to truly close the case on the death of John F. Kennedy. We have sidetracked our daily pursuits for over 3 decades because we know, Mr. President, that John Kennedy's vision was not ended as the result of a lucky shot by a misfit punk with a cheap rifle. If only it were that easy. The truth, however, could be. While many would plead for a new investigation into the death of Mr. Kennedy, I will not so petition. I know that such an inquiry would be both fruitless and costly, and the millions of dollars and legislative hours involved will be better spent on children who do not have adequate school lunches or senior citizens who suffer through unspeakable pain at the end of their productive lives because they cannot afford decent health care. No, Mr. President, I can't even ask you to spend my meager tax dollars to satisfy my omnipresent curiosity and concern about the events of November 22nd, 1963. But I can ask you for your autograph. Or rather, I can humbly ask you to pick up a piece of inexpensive stationery and a pen, just as Lincoln wrote a Gettysburg Address draft on an envelope, and sign an order to release all materials from all agencies that bear in any way on the death of John Kennedy. It has been 31 years, Mr. President. The justifications of, quote, national security that sounded so ominous and so important when you and I were teenagers are no longer valid. It is hard to imagine even one piece of paper that needs to remain hidden for even one more day, given that we are talking about an event that happened before half of the current American population was born. True, there is a review board looking into the review of those materials, but that is, to date, mostly form and not a lot of substance, and time and resources are wasted to no purpose as I speak this evening. Simply order a release of the files. Whatever is behind those mysterious vaults and those stripes of magic mark ink will be the subject of some contention between researchers, but it will be their job to get to the truth, and based on all the facts, I'm convinced they will. It will cost this nation nothing, not even the black eye that might be expected when the full truth of November 22nd emerged, as the rest of the world and countless Americans already take the perfidy of past investigations for granted. And consider the gain. If all the energy currently expended to get to the bottom of the events of November 22nd were channeled into some other productive avenue, would that not constitute a huge gain for all Americans? And what nation in any past time frame in recorded history has ever truly come clean of a dubious event in its past? Yet is that not the basis of our nation? Weren't we created as a nation as the last best hope for mankind? Of course we were. It just takes extreme courage to live up to the promise. The soldiers and their families around John Kennedy at Arlington all had that courage, and they expended it all in one last heroic measure so that American children could grow to adulthood in a land of truth and peace and shine their own beacons to the rest of mankind. John Kennedy understood the same kind of courage and wrote about it in a bestseller. His vision of America meant so much to him that he rode through a political cauldron in an open car in broad daylight. He gambled and he lost. Pick up that pen, Mr. President. It will be the most courageous act ever taken in the Oval Office in the White House. And if you listen carefully, you will hear a grateful nation gently sigh because truth will have reappeared in our vision of ourselves. Ask not what your country can do for you, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again.
I'll sign that letter, won't you? Yeah, thank you, Walt. Excellent. I hope you've been stirred. I have. Let's have a good time. Let's learn from each other. The reception will be outside here. If I can help you in any way, let's do so, and see you in the morning. We can solve this thing. Thank you.
welcome to the first panel for today, which is the Kennedy Assassination, an International Perspective. We have had a change in the makeup of this panel. As most of you can see, we do not have, unfortunately, Peter Dale Scott. Peter Dale was regrettably and unavoidably detained. But we do have a very interesting panel for you this morning, and I think we have added some people and some information to this panel which will make it all the more interesting. Our first speaker this morning is Mr. Ian Griggs. Ian was born in England in 1939. He is a recently retired London police officer. He has been interested in the Kennedy assassination since reading Rush to Judgment in 1966. He is a member of Dallas 63, which is a British research group. He also serves on the advisory board of the JFK Resource Group here in Dallas. This is his second symposium and his fourth visit to Dallas. He just completed a book on the that was on the news of the Kennedy and Oswald murder. On the way that the news of the Kennedy and Oswald murders reached Britain. He has written numerous articles on the case and has been published on both sides of the Atlantic. Mr. Ian Griggs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's a pleasure to be back in the United States of America. It's a pleasure to be back in Texas. Above all, it's a pleasure to be back in the city of Dallas. Unfortunately, whenever I come to Dallas, it rains. I bring English weather with me. I apologize for that. And I apologize for last year's snow. I brought that as well. When I received an invitation to sit on this panel a few months ago, it was a great honor. As far as I know, the only Brit to have been afforded this honor previously was Matthew Smith last year, the author. So if I'm number two to someone like that, I'm very happy. Initially, I was to represent Great Britain, but with the makeup of the panel, I'm now claiming to represent Europe, so I'm even more happy. Let me just go briefly over how I got into this thing. Robert's introduced me, and he's explained that 1966, Rush to Judgment, that hooked me. Going back to November the 22nd, 63, I remember where I was, what I was doing, and I remember some of it with a tinge of regret. It was a Friday evening. I was unmarried. I was still living at home with my parents. I was 23 years old. My father had come home from work and had gone to the public library to change his library books. This was a regular routine. Every other Friday he would come home, and around about 6 o'clock British time, he would go up to the library. He got up to the library. For some reason, I recall I was laying on the floor in front of the TV. I don't know why I was laying on the floor, but I was laying on the floor. I remember this vividly. And the news of the shooting of Kennedy came through at around about 7 o'clock. That would be 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, about 7 o'clock our time. And it was an incident, and it was an unpleasant incident, but it wasn't world-shattering at that stage. But half an hour later, we got the news that the President is dead. This was around about 7:30. Now that was news, that was frightening, and that was, as we would say in England, that was out of order. You don't do that sort of thing. My father came home about 5 or 10 minutes later, and as a cocky 23-year-old, as he came through the door, I said, "Hey, Dad, who's the President of the USA?" And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, don't be silly, Kennedy." And I smirked, a deadly smirk, and I said, "No, it's not, it's Johnson." Now that remark was made by me on the evening of November the 22nd, 63, and I've regretted it ever since. I regret ever saying those words. It was stupid, it was irreverent, and it wasn't clever. I don't share that with many people. because I'm ashamed of it, but that was my initial reaction to the assassination. Shock, horror, and then a bit of cockiness, which was not right. Anyway, from that moment on, the news came across the Atlantic, minute by minute, hour by hour. There were news bulletins almost continuously. The good news, of course, is within an hour they caught the guy who did it. Great, they've got this guy. We learned that he was Lee Harvey Oswald, he was a commie, he was a loony, he was a nutcase, he'd done it all by himself, and that was it. Good, case solved within an hour. Well done, the DPD. 2 days later, even better news. This little guy with a hat manages to get to him in the police station and blows him away. Great, justice. This is good. The script is good. That's how it hit me in England. This is how it hit almost everybody in England. I think it was probably similar in a lot of cities in this country. A few months later, there were doubts expressed in England. And in '64, the Warren Commission came out. There were a few doubts, but overall, basically, it was accepted as a magnificent piece of literature that couldn't have been bettered by William Shakespeare. Everything was there, it was complete, it was, they got it right, and that was it. Then the doubts really began, and in Britain, I think the doubts possibly began, the strong doubts began earlier than they began on this side of the Atlantic. I think a lot of you have heard of the Who Killed Kennedy Committee, which was a group of left-wing intellectuals, theatre people, arts people, politicians. Bertrand Russell was a leading light, Hugh Trevor Roper, various people who later became MPs. And they questioned this thing. They questioned the Warren Report, and they started to say, hey, this is wrong. This chap in the window didn't do it. He's been set up. He's what he says he was. He's a patsy. This went on and went on. And in 1966, Mark Lane published Rush to Judgment. Now, as you know, he was unable to find a publisher in the United States. I wonder why. He eventually published that book in England. Bodley Head published it. And it was an instant bestseller. I think I can say in my life, I've only ever worn out two things through constant use. And one was a paperback edition of Rush to Judgment, which literally fell to pieces. And the other thing I wore out through constant use was Sgt. Pepper by the Beatles. So there's a good British connection there. I've been into investigating this assassination ever since reading that book. Mark Lane owes me a lot. I've spent thousands of pounds, I've travelled thousands of miles, and I've met thousands, not thousands, so hundreds of fellow assassination freaks, like people like you. And I'm proud to be called a buff. That's no problem to me. I'm proud of that. After Rush to Judgment, there were other books that came out. You know the books I mean, 6 Seconds in Dallas, Buchanan's book, Epstein's books, etc., etc. But for the Brits, the next really big event was Anthony Summers' conspiracy. Now, that rekindled a lot of interest in England. Although people like me had never gone away from the thing, there were people who had been into it in a big way when Rush to Judgment appeared, but then drifted out. Excuse me. Anthony Summers' book, Rekindle the Flame. As you know, it was a best-selling hardback, best-selling paperback. He reissued it a few years later, made some more money. But I'm very, very proud that Anthony Summers is a fellow Brit. He lives in Ireland. He's approachable. We can telephone him, we write to him, we get answers, and as you all know, he's a leading author on this subject. The next main event, obviously, is Oliver Stone's film, JFK. It had much the same impact in Britain as it had over here. Even before the film was finished, we were being told, this is nonsense, this is, the man is taking liberties with facts, don't go to this film, leave it alone. Exactly the same as over here. Now, that was the best thing that could have happened to that film in England. We all flocked to see it. And it brought a lot of people back into this investigation, and it brought, more importantly, brought a lot of new people into it, particularly new young people. As a result of that film, I think it was a result of that, our group in Britain, Dallas 63, was formed. Now, we'd never had a research group in GB before, and the group began basically just by 4 young men in Liverpool, back to Beetleland, 4 young men in Liverpool sitting around a table one night with a few bottles of beer and talking about the assassination. And from that, 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago, we've grown now to a national, indeed an international group of over 100 people. And those people include men, women, boys, girls, intellectuals, people who are unemployed, people who are retired, people from the medical profession, the police profession, the teaching profession, and we have a very wide range of types of people, and above all we have a very wide range of interests. I have certain interest in the case above others, and other people have their own specialities. We have regular meetings in Liverpool every month, which are attended by up to 30 or 40 people. I have now begun to run meetings in the London area every 2 months, and we invite guest speakers. We've had Matthew Smith. We're hoping for Tony Summers to appear and speak to us. Most of our speakers are from our own ranks. We have 1 or 2 very, very thorough researchers and authors. Well, I hope we've got more than 1 or 2. I hope we've got several. Several of us, including myself, have been honoured by having our work published in this country. There have been articles in Dateline Dallas, articles in Fourth Decade, and we're proud to contribute to this, to the writing that's being produced on the subject. What's pleased us more than anything is the fact that we've been accepted. We've been accepted by you. It's an honour to us that we're not looked upon as a bunch of ignorant upstarts from across the pond who are delving into something that doesn't concern us. This does concern us. He was your president. I can't claim he was my president, much as I'd like to. He was your president, but he was a man of the world. And every citizen in the world, on both sides of what was then the Iron Curtain, were affected when those shots were fired in this city in '63. As I say, our group has grown to 100 people. Last year, for the 30th anniversary here, I think there were about 12, maybe more Brits here. This year, unfortunately, due to the distance to be travelled, the finances, I think there are only about 6 or 8 of us. You've no doubt seen us. We're flying around, floating around. We're asking questions. We're showing off our British accents, and we welcome you coming to talk to us. But please stop calling us all Australians. I mean, I keep telling you, we don't have accents. You're the people with the accents. We don't have accents. As Robert said in the intro, this is my 4th visit to Dallas. I retired from a 22-year police career in May of this year, and since May of this year, this is my 4th trip to the States. Now, I can't make too many more. I'm running out of money, but it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be in Dallas. It's a pleasure to meet new people. It's a pleasure to say hello to the old people. I'm a member of the advisory board on the JFK resource group. I was very, very close to Larry Howard. I'm very pleased to see Darryl in the audience today. Thanks, Darryl. I was mixed up with the trip to Kansas City last month, which was an honour for me. And it was an honour to share a panel such as this with people like Marina Oswald and Beverly Oliver, and Ed Hoffman, Craig Roberts and Jack White. And when I sat on that panel, that's the first time I've ever sat on a panel. This is the second. And when I sat on that panel, I knew I'd arrived and I had been accepted and people knew me and respected me, and that was a tremendous kick for me. Kansas City was an eye-opener for me. I sat here, I fielded questions, answered questions, and I was amazed at the depth of knowledge that some of those kids had in Kansas City. We were aiming at high school kids, and perhaps the attendances weren't as great as we'd anticipated and hoped for, but the people who came were knowledgeable, they were inquisitive, they were intelligent, and they were most of them were under 20 years old. Now that's the way this thing has got to go. We've got to bring the youth of the country into this investigation so that when we are gone, there's another generation to follow on and maybe solve this thing. Even better than that would be if we can solve the thing before that, and it's not necessary for a 3rd or 4th, 5th generation of researchers to be born. But That's perhaps wishful thinking. Let me just go through one or two other little pieces of personal experience. I was very lucky last year in that I acquired the 26 volumes. There are very few sets on the other side of the pond. They're in libraries, they're in museums, there are very, very few in private hands. I was able to purchase a set last year thanks to people at the old AIC, Larry Howard, etc. And when I came over in November, there they were. They're my set of 26 volumes. Cost me an arm and a leg, but there they were mine. Problem, get them across the pond. I'm sure there are people in this audience who've got those 26 volumes at home. They weigh 55 pounds. That's half a hundredweight. And I took those books on the aircraft as hand luggage, as carry-on luggage. I already had 2 suitcases full of the products of the last arrived bookshop. So I bought a golf bag, and I put these 26 volumes in this golf bag, and I walked on the plane like this. That was step 1. That was negotiated. Then came step 2. You're supposed to put your luggage either under the seat in front of you, into the bag like this, or in the overhead locker. And I found some poor unsuspecting guy. Could you give me a hand with my bag? Sure. I think it was the only American Airlines flight last year when 2 passengers got hernias on the flight. I got the books back. I made it known through the members of our research group that I had them, and my phone has not stopped ringing. I get telephone calls almost every day, and I welcome them, and it's very, very encouraging that the people in Britain are researching, and they're researching deeply enough to need references from the 26 volumes. And all I need is a volume number and a page number or a subject, and I'll either ring them back or I photocopy pages. And this is perhaps an illustration that research is continuing over there in this way. I can personally vouch for it. This is a very tenuous British connection here I'm going to tell you about. This goes back to last year, and Larry Howard. Larry had been showing me the Manica Cockano rifle that he had in the AIC. I don't know why, as far as I'm concerned, there was no Manica Cockano rifle involved in this assassination, but there we are. I'd become quite happy handling the weapon, playing around with it, and best of all, Larry trusted me with it. And one day Larry was in his office, very, very busy, and a group of Brazilian TV guys arrived, a team of 4 with an interpreter, an American interpreter. And they wanted to borrow the Mannlicher and go up to the 6th floor of the school book depository and hang out of the window with this thing and sort of see what the trajectories were and pretend to fire it. Now, that was okay as far as the rifle went, and Larry was very busy. And Larry gave me the rifle and he said, look, will you go with these people, look after this gun, give them any assistance you can. And I said, okay, sure. Now, I was under the impression that they'd got prior permission from the 6th floor people. Anyway, we went in the main entrance to the steps, and I had this Manica Cockano rifle wrapped in a curtain.
Curtain rods.
Howard Verbal will back this story up. He was with me. And between walking from the AIC to the book depository, the curtain had sort of, the back end of this gun was poking out the back end of this curtain. I marched up the steps of the TFBD, and the chap in there, wow. He said, what have you got there? And I said, it's exactly what you think it is. And he said, didn't you read the notice on the door as you came in? And I said, look, I'm sorry, I'm an ignorant Brit. I can't understand your accent. I can't read notices. He showed me the notice. No weapons or explosives to be brought into this building. I thought, gosh, that should have been here 30 years ago. Anyway, my Brazilian companions said, look, we'll try and make arrangements with the people upstairs, but we can't bring the gun in, we'll try and do something. So I then said, okay, I'm going to the coffee shop across the road. So I take my Mannlicher out of the book depository and go into the Daltex building. I believe that the only other person who's done this is a fellow Brit called Gary Oldman. during the making of JFK movie when he played Oswald. And this is a story I tell whenever I speak in England. It always brings a chuckle, because although this is a serious subject, indeed a deadly serious subject, we've got to look at a light side occasionally. Even in the darkest and blackest Shakespearean tragedy, there is always a spell where there's a little bit of humour. And this is my little contribution. Have I got very much longer, Robert, or are you going to kick me off?
About 10 minutes.
Give me another few minutes. Right. As a result of my frequent visits to the States, I've drawn the attention of one or two people. Why is it that nobody can send me a parcel from America to England without it mysteriously bursting open and then being resealed before I get it? Why is that? Why do you need to put return addresses on envelopes? I wrote to a researcher 2 months ago, and unbeknown to me, he'd moved. He had his address on the front, my address on the back, a sealed letter. Somewhere, someone, now I don't know if it was US Postal Services or the British Postal Services, someone somewhere couldn't see this return address on the back and had to open it up. Now I don't know whether they're opening my mail or opening his mail, but why is this? Anyone tell me? Burt Lancaster has recently died, film actor. My favourite Burt Lancaster film was Executive Action. You all know the film, you all know the content. Why is that video banned in my country? Why can I not go into a video store and get Executive Action? Anyone got any ideas? It kills me. I love the film. I bought a copy over here. I play it at home, and every time I play that video, I think this is close to what happened. The thing was made years ago. It was the last film that Robert Ryan ever made, so it's an important film to the film people. It now becomes one of the late Burt Lancaster's films, but it's not mentioned in any of his obituaries. The man made 70 films. Maybe it wasn't one of his major films, but I can't find an obituary to Burt Lancaster where that film is even mentioned. I understand from people I've spoken to here this week that Burt Lancaster would not take part in a film unless he believed in it and believed in its content and its object. But he performed in that film. In fact, he played the lead in that film. Things like this worry me. Things like this worry people across the Atlantic. The question I'm asked, and I've been asked it again this week, is why are you interested in the Kennedy assassination? Why is there such interest in Europe? And my answer is, it's a remark that I heard from Americans last year, and I heard Americans say, it happened in 1963, we're frightened it could happen in 1993. I can understand that. And I can twist that around slightly to my point of view, and I can say, it happened in Dallas, could it happen in London? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a good audience. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Ian. Our next panelist this morning is Al Navis. Al has been involved in researching the assassination since 1965. He has appeared on hundreds of radio and television programs over the past 25 years. His articles on the case have been published in various magazines, including Maclean's, Star Week, Video Mon Amour, and the Toronto Star, which is Canada's largest circulation newspaper. At present, he owns Allmark and Company Booksellers, a mail-order book service in Thornhill, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. Mr. Navis.
Thank you, Robert. I'm a little bit nonplussed with Ian's remarks, as he's taken most of my jokes, and oh well.
I don't believe that.
Oh well. I'm basically entitling this How a Canadian Assassination Researcher Became a Bookseller, or vice versa. I was almost 12 on the day that Kennedy was assassinated, and like most Americans and indeed most citizens of the world, was shocked, horrified, and indelibly imprinted by the shooting. On Sunday, the 24th of November, 1963, again like most Americans, I was sitting transfixed in front of our brand new RCA color television, watching, mostly in black and white, the procession of the President's body from the White House to the Capitol Rotunda for public viewing. When ABC cut to Dallas to televise the transfer of Lee Harvey Oswald from the Dallas City Jail to the county jail, I witnessed my first live killing. This oxymoron began for me a journey which has lasted 31 years at last count and has taken me all over the United States and Canada in search of Excalibur. For when Lee Oswald was shot that Sunday morning 31 years ago, little did Americans realize that far from closing the case with a solid pox on Gerald Posner, it rendered insoluble the crime of the century. As the network began replaying the shooting over that day, I remarked to my brother, then 23 years old, that the guy who shot Oswald looked like Al Capone. My brother thought Oswald got what he deserved, and so did most Americans. A voracious reader, I quickly inhaled anything on the assassination which I could find, newspaper and magazine articles, memorial tributes, even records. Then in February of 1964, when I was in downtown Toronto on a Saturday to buy a record by a group called the Beatles, I passed a bookstore which had a small book on the assassination in their front window. The title was Red Roses from Texas. The publisher was Frederick Miller of London, and the author was a French journalist, Naren E. Gunn, who had the original Les Roses Rouges de Dallas translated into English. It cost $3.25 in Canada because it was a hardcover in the days of when paperbacks were still 35 cents. So I went in and asked them if they'd reserve a copy until next Saturday, which they did. And when I finally bought it and got it home, I devoured it on Sunday afternoon. After all, Saturday night was reserved for hockey night in Canada, which is sacred. I telephoned the bookstore after school on Monday and asked that I be notified when any other books on the assassination arrived. 3 months later, in May of 1964, I had a message from the store informing me that they indeed did have a new book on the assassination. It was called by the highly imaginative title, Who Killed Kennedy, by Thomas G. Buchanan, who was an American political correspondent then employed in Paris by the General Organization Company at work at computerizing Paris's accounting records. Buchanan had also covered the trial of Jack Ruby for the French weekly L'Express, who published a series of his articles. When Martin Secker and Warburg, the British publishers, released the book, it caused an immediate sensation for its anti-lone nut conclusions. Il Mattino, the Italian newspaper, reviewed the Italian version of the book and said, quote, "A fascinating book embodying the product of a private investigation conducted in the face of countless obstacles and carried out with the most scrupulous attention and insight," unquote. That review is very typical of how the European press and the European people looked at the killing of John Kennedy. Very few bought the one lone nut who killed the one lone nut who killed Kennedy theory, which was being leaked from the Warren Commission hearings to the major American media. In Europe, political assassination was usually the result of a conspiracy, and most probably an inside job. Soon, more books and a flood of magazine articles and essays began to surface, and many from, as Ian says, across the pond. Buchanan wrote an article, The Rights of Man and Death in Dallas, for the Belgrade Yugoslavia magazine Delo in February 1964. Hungarian Lajos Kodalovsky wrote Thoughts on the Background to the Assassination in May of 1964. Kai Hermann wrote Who Murdered Kennedy in the Hamburg, Germany periodical Die Zeit in July 1964. Danish author Ida Bachmann wrote Who Murdered President Kennedy, a defense of Oswald's identification for the Copenhagen periodical Frit Danmark. Leo Sauvage took time away from writing his own book, L'Affaire Oswald, Réponse au Rapport Warren, published later in the United States as The Oswald Affair, an examination of the contradictions and omissions of the Warren Report, to write an article on Thomas Buchanan called Thomas Buchanan Detective for the Copenhagen, Denmark magazine Perspektiv de Dansken magazine late in 1964. Sauvage was also a regular contributor to articles critical of the official findings to the American magazine National Guardian. Well-known and respected German author Hans Haber wrote Half of the Truth, The Murderer Identified, the Murder Unexplained, for the Zurich periodical Weltwoche in late 1964. An not accredited article in December 1964 Sarajevo, Yugoslavia magazine asked, "Did the police kill Kennedy?" And even Englishmen such as Lord Patrick Devlin wrote in the New Statesman an article in early 1965 titled, "Was Oswald Guilty?" And humorist, author, and actor Malcolm Muggeridge wrote, "A New Kennedy Theory. Oswald was a double agent for the FBI, CIA, and the KGB," for that same magazine. Then came the books. Oswald the Truth by Joachim Josten, a German-born war correspondent and author. Although an American citizen since 1948, Josten nonetheless gave Newsweek readers the benefit of his European background, attitudes, and sensibilities in both his reportage and his books. In the Moscow periodical New Times, an article by Vladimir Berezhikov titled "More Light on the Kennedy Assassination" positively reviewed the Josten book in October of 1966. Josten's most famous book on the case is arguably Oswald, Assassin or Fall Guy, published in 1964 with the dedication to Mark Lane, whose brief for Oswald, published in the December 1963 issue of National Guardian, seemed to be the sole domestic dissent excuse me, against the ever-growing juggernaut of the Warren Commission. It was these foreign authors and columnists, along with a small handful of American dissenters like Mark Lane and Penn Jones Jr., Harold Weisberg, Sylvia Marr, Josiah Tink Thompson, Paris Flamond, and Edward J. Epstein, who captured my interest in beginning my own research into the Kennedy assassination. So during the summer of 1965, at the ripe old age of 13 and a half, I began to correspond with these authors as well as people in the Dallas area who had witnessed the shooting or were in other ways connected with the case. By using the Warren Commission's 26-volume exhibits and testimonies, I was able to track down and interview by mail most, if not all, of the people listed in those volumes. I would go into my father's office on the weekends and, using his secretary's brand new IBM Selectric typewriter, would ask questions of these people. Since he was in the printing business, my father supplied me with both letterhead and envelopes so as not to disclose my less than advanced age. On the whole, these people were more than cooperative with me, probably because I never asked them more than 2 questions per letter, and if they said a subject was closed, then I wouldn't pursue it. They also seemed more at ease discussing the case and their involvement in it with someone outside the United States, maybe because I was beyond FBI influence, or so they thought. The most compelling correspondence I had was with Lee Bowers, who, as you may remember, was at the time of the assassination working as a tower controller for the Union Terminal Railroad. I had asked Lee to tell me what he saw behind the stockade fence from his vantage point on the 2nd floor of the tower building. And he said, quote, "I'm going to tell you something that I haven't told anyone else. I'll tell you this because you're up there in Canada away from their influence. They can't get to you. I'm scared that if what I really saw ever becomes public, they're going to get to me." About 3 or 4 minutes before the president's car came through, I saw 2 men about 10 feet from the corner of the fence. One was wearing almost what looked like a police uniform, and he had a rifle. I saw him shoot at the president's car. I was so scared that I told nobody what I really saw. I think I told Mark Lane that something caught my eye, but I was so scared if I told him what I really saw, then he'd print it, and I'd be dead. They'd get me, and I'm sure of it, end quote. When I read these words from Lee Bowers, I immediately wrote back assuring him that I would never put him in danger by publishing anything. We kept up our correspondence for about a year, then nothing. About 2 months after his last letter in August of 1966, I received a short note from Lee's brother who said that Lee had been killed in an auto accident and that he was clearing out Lee's things and came across my letters, so he thought that I should know. I wrote back asking about the circumstances of Lee's death, and he said that Lee disappeared for almost a week. And when he returned, he had a bandage on the end of one of his fingers. It was now shorter than the others. Lee said that he had an accident and lost the end of the finger and that he didn't want to discuss it. His brother noticed that Lee was very nervous, almost paranoid, and that he said someone was after him. Less than 1 week later, Lee Bowers was dead. Was Lee Bowers silenced? Was he captured? Was he tortured? Who knows? All I know is that he was so concerned that they, whoever they were, would get him if his testimony, his actual testimony, was ever made public. Most of my research took place from 1965 until 1973, and most of it was centered here in Dallas. One thing I noticed when interviewing people who were here in Dallas before the assassination is that there were an inordinate number of $100 bills floating around the Dallas area. Now, in 1963, $100 bills were rather scarce. You have to remember the Chevrolet cost $2,500 in 1963, whereas now it costs $25,000. So how many $1,000 bills do you see? One fellow told me of an occurrence which happened to him before the president's visit. I'll let him tell it in his own words. Quote, "One morning, I can't remember exactly what the date was, but it was around Halloween. I was walking west on Main Street, and I came to the corner of Main and Lamar. I was waiting for the light to change so I could cross the street when a guy comes up to me and says, 'How'd you like to make a quick 100?' I asked him how illegal the thing was he wanted me to do. He said it wasn't illegal at all, but that he couldn't do it himself, so I said, 'All right, what do you want me to do?' So he gave me the address of a restaurant and told me to go there that day at 12:30. In the back left booth would be a woman sitting by herself wearing a red hat. I should go up to her and say, 'My, it sure is warm out today, isn't it?' Then I should go across the street and he would give me $100. Well, I thought, I can sure use the 100 and it doesn't sound too dangerous, so what the hell, I told him okay. So at 12:30, I walk into this restaurant, and sure enough, in the back left booth is this woman wearing a red hat. I go up to her and say the line. She nods. I leave. Across the street, when I come out of the restaurant, is this guy. I go to him, and he gives me a $100 bill. Well, the first thing I do is go to the bank to see if it was good. It was, and I asked the teller to break it into 10s and 20s. End quote. Was this how the committee would communicate down through the ranks so as not to have direct links between levels? That was my guess, and when I mentioned this to Penn Jones in the late 60s, he agreed. Penn Jones called me in 1970 and told me about a book called Farewell America. He said, try and get a copy up there in Canada or in England because they weren't letting the book into the U.S. So I contacted Foyle's Bookshop in London and asked them to search for the book for me. About a month later, I got a note from the store saying they'd found a copy, and I ordered it. When it finally arrived, it took almost 4 days for me to read and reread the book. With all due respect, the prose is even less readable than Harold Weisberg. But the content blew me away. I immediately began to research the book, asking around if other researchers had read it. I even contacted persons inside the Robert Kennedy circle for their take on the book. From 2 different sources within the Robert Kennedy camp, which I still protect to this day, I found out the genesis of Farewell America. It started almost immediately after the assassination of the president when Robert Kennedy asked family friend Daniel Patrick Moynihan to find the answers to 2 questions which were bothering him. First, was Jimmy Hoffa involved in the murder of the president? Second, were the Secret Service paid off? Moynihan very quietly assembled a staff and began a private and discreet investigation to answer Robert Kennedy's questions. In mid-January of 1964 came a confidential report. The answers were no and no. But the report was very critical of the Secret Service's performance. Yet Robert Kennedy was not fully satisfied. He felt that there was more to it than that. Through personal friendships overseas, he was able to silently recruit 2 retired assets from French intelligence. They, in turn, elicited the assistance of a retired British MI6 agent. Together, through long-time intelligence contacts, this privately financed team was able to ferret out information which was off limits to regular researchers. While other researchers were trying to get in through the front doors of the CIA, the Pentagon, and the FBI, they were using contacts developed over many years of espionage and covert activities against the Soviets. In short, they were able to get in through the back door. When their investigation was completed at the end of 1966, they asked a French journalist named Hervé Lamar to assemble their notes, interviews, and report and put it into a more readable form. This they submitted to Robert Kennedy, and as you can see how Kennedy is transformed from being the senator from New York to a potential presidential candidate. But Kennedy makes a critical and unfortunately fatal error during the California primary. When asked a question by a Berkeley student reporter if, when he is elected, will he open the files, Kennedy replies that only the president can open those files, smiles at the reporter, and tells him that he will be president. By publicly stating his intentions to reopen the investigation into his brother's murder, Robert Kennedy sealed his own fate. The committee, cognizant of the fact of their vulnerability with another Kennedy in the White House, mobilized yet another hit team, this time using the more recently perfected mind control gambit. After Robert Kennedy's assassination on the 5th of June and his death the next day, Hervé Lamar and his group were now without their chief sponsor. They decided to try to get Farewell America published as a book. They approached major New York publishers such as Holt Reinhardt Winston, Random House, Simon & Schuster, and Alfred A. Knopf, among others. No publisher would touch the book. It was far too controversial a subject, and their stance was even more contentious than anything before. There is a line at the back of Farewell America which states, quote, "We challenge the individuals whose names are cited in this book to sue us for libel," end quote. Now imagine for a moment, if you will, you're a corporate lawyer for a publishing company, and you see this citation at the back of a book your firm is considering publishing. I would guess your vote would be no. The same negative responses came from the usually more liberal British publishing firms who had already placed many of the earlier researchers' ideas in front of the people. So Lamar and the group then decided to have the book first released in French. It was an immediate bestseller. It was then translated into Italian and then into German. A similar response came from both countries. With the proceeds from these editions, they had 10,000 copies printed in English. These copies were printed in Belgium, even though the firm they created, Frontiers Publishing, was incorporated in Vaduz, Liechtenstein. To make it more complicated, the legal address of Frontiers was a law firm in Geneva, Switzerland, and the editorial offices were Hervé Lamar's office in Paris, France. Lamar had also created a pseudonym, a nom de plume, as the author of Farewell America, one James Hepburn. The name came from Lamar's abiding love for the actress Audrey Hepburn, and the James came from the French word for I love, which is j'aime. He even created a false biography on the rear flap of the book's dust jacket. 4,000 of these copies were shipped to Manchester, England for distribution throughout Britain, and the other 6,000 copies were sent to Montreal for North American distribution. After about 2,000 of the North American copies had been distributed, the United States government, most probably the FBI, asked my government, the Canadian government, most probably the Ministry of Customs and Immigration, to find a way to capture the shipment to prevent further copies from being sent into the United States. This was accomplished by imposing a retroactive duty on the original shipment from Belgium, and then confiscating the shipment for non-payment of that duty. Nice scam. But what it did accomplish was to staunch the flow of Farewell America into the United States from Canada. In 1985, for reasons still unclear to me, the remaining copies of Farewell America were sold en masse by the Canadian government at auction. My own theory is that every business once a year has to do stock taking, and usually every employee pitches in to help. Whoever was assigned to enumerate that particular aisle would have come across a skid of books. They probably didn't even make note of what the title was, so they were placed up for auction. An interesting sidebar to this story occurred in 1967 during the Garrison investigation of Clay Shaw's involvement in the assassination. A phone call to the district attorney's office in New Orleans from someone saying he was a representative of Frontiers Publishing and that they had a work in progress on the Kennedy assassination, and would he be interested in receiving galley proofs? After the package arrived in New Orleans, you could see the Garrison investigation rapidly accelerate forward. He realized that he was indeed on the right track. What he didn't realize was the federal government would not allow the investigation to continue unobstructed. They placed roadblocks in front of Garrison at every turn. His trial was a failure not because of his incompetence, but more because of the federal government's intrusive torpedoing of witnesses. Farewell America made me realize that the lines of research I was uncovering were parallel with many other researchers. I began to concentrate on formulating a plausible scenario for both the conspiracy committee's makeup as well as the events in Dealey Plaza. It is that scenario which I have developed by believing the early witnesses and by disbelieving those people associated in any way with the United States government. After all, who has more to protect his job, a doctor in Parkland Hospital or a Navy pathologist in Bethesda? The answer is all too obvious. My scenario will be published as a book entitled Evidence of Things Not Seen as soon as the manuscript is completed. I only hope that I do not have the same problem getting published that Farewell America did. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Al. Our next speaker this morning is Sir Frank Niescore from Nigeria. He is based here in the United States. Frank was the owner of the Golden Egg Restaurant and the People's Restaurant, all of which were here in Texas, and he has been with world politics for the past 20 years. He is now writing a book on politics of the Third World, and he is the founder and president of a nonprofit organization called Christ of Mercy, which has been reaching out to hundreds of homeless and less fortunates in and around the Dallas Metroplex. Frank.
Good morning, distinguished and patriotic citizen. I am very privileged to be in your midst this morning. I was highly interested when I was asked if I can, have some speak on this matter. This has been almost 31 years. It has been almost 31 years of the incident, but to most of us, it still do as if it was yesterday. I could remember very well where I was and what happened the day I had the news. I was 14 years by then, and my first year in junior high back in Nigeria. When the news came, it was a big shock to the whole nation. Nigeria being only 3 years old then after getting their independence from Britain in 1960. The media wasn't all that strong. And the newspaper we had that time was the West African Pilot, which happens to flash the news. It has a very great impact in Nigerian government then. We shut schools, all schools were closed for one day. We had a lot of Roman Catholic churches had a special mass for him, a requiem mass, in which some of them have a mock coffin covered with American flags. Satan was praying. They had a vigil for him. it gives me pleasure really seeing what has been going on for the past few days here, that some people can travel from all parts of this country to attend this. But I, for one, it gives me a very great hope, because the killing of Kennedy has been a very great impact in most Nigerians, so to say. We had about one or two of his words that is, every father would like to pass to the child or the son or the daughter. That is where he said, think of what you can do for your country, not what your country can do for you. It has been a very great aspiration for us with that word. I know with that word, every time I remember it, it's still as new as ever. And that gave me the hope and the faith to push ahead and to think, what can I do? The extra miles that I can give. In generally, Nigerians looked at that assassination as a big blow to the whole world, not only in America, but the whole world. Like I said before, I was just 14 then, and from that, I know that really one can, focus his attention on what to be in future, what to be when he's grown up, the type of life you can do to reach out to people. The Kennedy assassination is something that, I can remember in 1967, 4 years after his death, Nigeria happens to get a civil war, which was very bloody. And most of the Christians then, the Roman Catholics, so to say, all their hope was, God will forgive people who killed Kennedy. During the war, they were saying this, they were praying that those people who plot against him, God won't forgive them. Because we felt that then that had he been in power, there must be some changes in the genocidal war going on in Nigeria then. And most of us who survived the war took it upon ourselves that, we will surely make a way to come to U.S. or to better our life or our community, for our communities. I came to this country and finished my schooling and get into business. And all along, I didn't know that really there is an organization like this. The first time I came here to Dallas, that was my goal, just to go and see the place and to go and, see what Dallas is made up of. Because before coming to US, what we had there is Texas is a cowboy state. Most of us in then high school and this, some of us picked the nickname Texas. Some answer Dallas, something to show that you're tough. We use it as tough names. But coming to Dallas, I found out really that Dallas is a peaceful place. And it's one of the best states I would like. I'm not saying this because I'm living here. But I strongly believe, like any other state, Dallas is good, despite the fact that it happened here in Dallas. When we were about coming here, a lot of my friends advised me, are you going to Texas? To Dallas? You must be out of your mind. I looked at it, I said, well, I would like to. He said, no, why not try other states? Because back there we don't know the difference really. He said, why not try something like New York, California? So I said, no, I will go to Dallas. And they said, going to Dallas? You're not even talking of Texas, but Dallas. Well, we will just say requirements before you leave. So, but all the same, I'm happy seeing the organization waxing strong. And I strongly believe that this might be the starting. Before you know it, it might be internationally. Because I know actually back home, some people are still eager, despite the fact that we don't have the access and the means to communicate or to find out certain things. And third world country, the way they do their politics is quite different from here. We have some writers like Wole Soyinka and Chino Achebe and others who will like to follow the issue. But back home, the government won't give them that power. And the government won't, like them to do that because really third world politics, they like to conceal everything within the so-called high-ups. But if the chance is given, I know many people who will like to be members of this organization back home. I know many writers who will like to write what they've seen. Some of my seniors then who has been following this back in Nigeria, but they don't have the access and the means to put up their books, which, some of them have visited here many a times and went back, but over there they can't put the books out. I will again seize this opportunity to, congratulate you patriotic citizens who has been standing firm on this. And we are not really doing it purely for the Kennedys, but for the entire world. Let us focus ourselves that way. This is something we are trying to prove the world that we are still interested. We want to know, and we want to, find out a solution. It didn't happen only here. Nigeria in 1966, what led to the civil war they had? They assassinated the president. Then that is 3-4 years after that of Kennedy. They did the same to Nigeria. But being a third world country, it wasn't all that, a big deal. And not only being a big deal, but that one was a political motivation. And on the assassination, they assassinated a president and took over the post. Quite unlike, what could happen here that the 2IC will take over. So in most cases, I will advise, or I will suggest, the organization to, start considering extending this power to other parts of the world. We are interested, we need that assistance, we need that help. In my major part in life is I like to be within the patriotic people, within people who understands that this life is just nothing. And you are made up of what you are, not what you have. And this has shown me, you distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy looking to your faces. I don't know how to congratulate you all. May the Almighty God bless you all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Frank. We are going to take a short break right now, 15 minutes until 10:30, at which time we will come back and hear from Mr. John Newman.
Okay, I've got 4 questions. Do you know if the Nigerian government has any files on the